Hi, everybody. Good to see you again. And we're going to be going over Daniel chapter 3 and 6 today. Well, Daniel, as we've been looking at Daniel, well, he's a man of God dealing with political governments, but he's still following the living God, the holy God, and being faithful to him in his walk in life. And also he's giving, he's a living testimony of who the living God is. And the kings that he's before and the people are all able to see who the real God is by Daniel continuing to follow him. So let's begin we're going to read through chapter 3 and the 6. Now, the reason I'm taking 3 and 6 is because they go together. So let's just take a broad step back and take a look at where we are in time and where we are in space as far as on the map, and then look at where we are as far as the book of Daniel goes, and we'll start there. We can see Jesus was 2,000 years before us, and Abraham was 2,000 years before Jesus. Now, who was in between Jesus and Abraham was David, so that's 1,000 years before Jesus is King David. So then you have the time of kings, and then basically who's in between those two, and I put 586 BC because that is when the temple and Jerusalem were destroyed after they had rejected God's direction, and he let the Babylonians come in. And that's around the time where we have Daniel and Ezekiel. We will see how at the time of kings, Assyria had come down, and they destroyed the northern kingdom Israel, which had 19 kings and not one good one. And then as God sent prophets, we had Judah that was in the south, based around Jerusalem, the two tribes, Judah and Benjamin. They had 20 kings, and out of the 28 were good, but they strayed from God again, as they often would, and that's where Babylon is able to come down, destroy Judah, and take those people of Judah into captivity into Babylon. And then after that, they were able to come back after the Persians took control with Cyrus, allowing them to come back and rebuild the temple. And then after the Persians, the Greeks came about until the Romans, and then that is when Jesus came in. Okay, as far as the map of the place we're looking at, we can see where Israel is, and to the south of Israel and to the left is Egypt. North of Israel is Phoenicia and Syria. And you can see which would be down to the right, sloping downwards, you would see the Tigris and Euphrates rivers running into the Persian Gulf. And the areas that the Bible's concerned with are what areas we're controlling. For instance, the ones that we talked to about Assyria, Babylon, Media and Persia, the Greeks and the Romans, controlling all of these different areas centered around God working with Israel there. But everybody is made by God, and God's concern is to go to the whole world. Now, a closer look we can see here is how this area was a fertile crescent, and people would travel along these areas, and just to give you a closer view. And then the view that we're looking at for the book of Daniel is we can see the basic pictures of the chapters on the lower left hand, and then we can see up on the left top, we can see Greece, and how in the book of Daniel we're shown how Greece will be in control Alexander the Great, and then he goes to, from him being in charge to his generals, and the region is broken up. From Daniel's point, really looking at the salvation of God, which is Christ. Now, if we look at basic pictures of the chapters, now the ones on the right, I've got Jesus and the things on the right. Those are the things of the New Testament. But I can see Daniel looking forward to the salvation of God, how he saves his people. And that's what we're going to be looking at today. Is we can look at chapter 1 where they get captured and taken and prepared before the king. And then we went over chapter 2 where we see the kingdoms as 4 metals, and then this stone, the God's kingdom coming in. Now we're on chapter 3, and what we're going to do is put 3 with 6, which is directly across from it. We have the 3 in the fire. When you look at Daniel 3, just think of the 3 in the fire. And then when you look at chapter 6, think of Daniel, one finger on your left hand, and then a claw of your right hand coming at him. That's 6. So 3 and 6 show the real salvation of God, that he saves us from the fire and he saves us from the pit. And that salvation that Daniel is looking towards is really Christ, who's making an appearance to Daniel as he has made an appearance and as have been given witness to him by the prophets and the apostles of Christ. Daniel 3, God saves from the fire. Nebuchadnezzar, the king, made an image of gold, whose height was 60 cubits, and its width 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura, in the province of Babylon. And King Nebuchadnezzar sent word to gather together the satraps, the administrators, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the officials of the province to come to the dedication of the image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So all of these are rulers, like satraps. Those are rulers, just like these other administrators within the government. So the satraps, the administrators, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the officials of the province gathered together for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So they're under the Babylonian king, Nebuchadnezzar. Then a herald cried aloud, "To you it is commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that at the time you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the harp, the lyre, and the psaltery, in symphony with all kinds of music, you shall fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning, fiery furnace." Now, isn't this interesting? Because, see, here we have people of the world, they can't come up in their humanistic way of rules and reigns that throws people in fire and does all kinds of destruction, where they would even put their babies up on altars to have them killed. And so, would you rather be under a just God that is merciful and kind and gracious, or would you rather be under the hand of man that can come up with all kinds of concoctions for brutality? 3:7. So at the time when all the people heard the sound of the horn, the flute, the harp, and the lyre, in symphony with all kinds of music, all the people, nations, and languages fell down, and they worshipped the golden image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and accused the Jews. Think about this. We're in the Babylonian kingdom. We have these Jews who had been taken from Judah and all of that region, and they've been taken over into the Babylonian community. And then people are looking at these 3 men that were with Daniel who would not bow down to worship idols. Daniel 3:9. They spoke and said to the king Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, the flute, the harp, the lyre, and the psaltery, in symphony with all kinds of music, shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into the midst of a burning, fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not paid due regard to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the gold image which you have set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in rage and fury, gave the command to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, so they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying to them, Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the gold image which I have set up? Now, if you are ready at the time you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the harp, the lyre, and the psaltery, in symphony with all kinds of music, and you fall down and worship the image which I have made, good. But if you do not worship, you shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning, fiery furnace. And who is the God who would deliver you from my hands? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If that is the case, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar was full of fury, and the expression on his face changed towards Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He spoke and commanded that they heat the furnace 7 times more than it was usually heated. And he commanded certain men of valor who were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and cast them into the fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their coats, their trousers, their turbans, and their other garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, because the king's command was urgent, and the furnace exceedingly hot, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they fell down into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished, and he rose in haste and he spoke, saying to his counselors, Did we not cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? They answered and they said to the king, True, O king. Look, he answered, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they aren't hurt. And the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. Then Nebuchadnezzar went near the mouth of the burning fiery furnace, and he spoke, saying, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came from the midst of the fire. And the satraps, administrators, governors, and the king's counselors gathered together. And they saw these men on whose bodies the fire had no power. The hair of their head was not singed, nor were their garments affected, and the smell of the fire was not on them. Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him. And they have frustrated the king's word, and yielded their bodies, that they should not serve nor worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree that any people, nation, or language which speaks anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made an ash heap, because there is no other God who can deliver like this. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. Well, isn't that something? That here we have a pagan king, the king of the Babylonians, that makes a decree that anyone who speaks amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be an ash heap. See, that really amazes me, and it should amaze you too, that we're not only getting witness from the prophets that God sent and the apostles that walked with Christ, but even from the pagan kings themselves, who had seen nothing like this in their whole realm, like a living God that Daniel and his companions were following. So if you want to turn to the living God, God has sent the way for salvation to be saved from being a burning ash heap. And he sent that through the mercy of his Son, Jesus Christ, who takes the sins of all of us on himself, that he took them on there, and he died with those sins so that they could be wiped out. And he is risen up with the Father, and he gave testimony beforehand through his Spirit, through these with Daniel and others, and through his Holy Spirit through those who have been walking with him. So any of us, that's what I had to do. I had to turn to him, and I saw that he was true. I was not true. He was right. I was not right. And just lay it down before him, which is what they call turning back to him. Repenting is mean turn around to him, and then submit to him and follow him with all your faith, and continue to follow him and walk with his help, and by having his Holy Spirit, so you can walk with power and have the testimony like these men of God did, and be faithful until the end. Okay, let's go on and move to Daniel 6, where we can see that God saves from the pit. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps to be over the whole kingdom, and over these 3 governors, of whom Daniel was one, that the satraps might give account to them, so that the king would suffer no loss. Then this Daniel distinguished himself above the governors and satraps, because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king gave thought to setting him over the whole realm. So here we had in chapter 3 that the companions of Daniel were under the Babylonian king, and now we are looking at Daniel within the Persian realm. Daniel 6:4. So the governors and satraps sought to find some charge against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they could find no charge or fault, because he was faithful, nor was there any error or fault found in him. Then these men said, "We shall not find any charge against this Daniel, unless we find it against him concerning the law of his God." You see Daniel and his companions following the faithful God, but they're also dealing with the politics of the time. And if you look at the politics throughout time, politics change to where you've got nations that are totally outlawing any religion, and they become atheistic nations where they put themselves in charge. But even under those things where man thinks that they can do things on their own, well, they end up turning unjust. And in the last 100 years, you can see where just the atheist nations alone killed over 100 million people, or around 100 million people. And it's been that way throughout history, where you can be in a country, and if you're following God, the Almighty God, you can be banned from buying, selling, from dealing in the communities, and from even having life at all. That if you stand up as a believer in God, that they can kill you and your whole families. Daniel 6:6. So these governors and satraps thronged before the king, and said thus to the king, "King Darius, live forever. All the governors of the kingdom, the administrators, satraps, the counselors, and advisors have consulted together." Oh, okay, they're consulting together, but I think they left Daniel out. "To establish a royal statute, and to make a firm decree that whoever petitions any god or man for 30 days except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the decree and sign the writing so that it cannot be changed, according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which does not alter. Therefore King Darius signed the written decree. Now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went home, and in his upper room, with his window open toward Jerusalem, he knelt down on his knees 3 times that day, and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as was his custom since early days. Then these men assembled and found Daniel praying and making supplication before his God. And they went before the king and spoke concerning the king's decree. Have you not signed a decree that every man who petitions any god or man within 30 days except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? The king answered and said, The thing is true, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which does not alter. So they answered and said before the king, That Daniel, who is one of the captives from Judah, does not show due regard for you, O king, or for the decree that you have signed, but makes his petition 3 times a day. And the king, when he heard these words, was greatly displeased with himself, and set his heart on Daniel to deliver him. And he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. Then these men approached the king and said to the king, Know, O king, that it is the law of the Medes and the Persians, that no decree or statute which the king establishes may be changed. So the king gave the command, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. But the king spoke, saying to Daniel, Your God, whom you serve continually, he will deliver you. Then a stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den. And just thinking about that stone, it reminds me how Jesus is the stone that the builders rejected. And the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with signets of his lords, that the purpose concerning Daniel might not be changed. Now the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting, and no musicians were brought before him. Also his sleep went from him. Then the king arose very early in the morning, and he went in haste to the den of lions. And when he came to the den, he cried out with a lamenting voice to Daniel. The king spoke, saying to Daniel, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions? Then Daniel said to the king, O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, so that they have not hurt me, because I was found innocent before him, and also, O king, I have done no wrong before you. God has his sent one. Angel means sent one, and he is the one who shuts the lions' mouths. And, I think of this being thrown in the den of lions, and it also means a pit, and how, there is a pit and fire that awaits those who reject God, but those who turn to God have everlasting life. Daniel 6:23. Now the king was exceedingly glad for him, and commanded that they should take Daniel up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, or the pit, and no injury whatever was found on him, because he believed in his God. And the king gave the command, and they brought those men who had accused Daniel, and they cast them into the den of lions, them, their children, and their wives, and the lions overpowered them and broke all of their bones in pieces before they ever came to the bottom of the den. This is really something, because I see this in Daniel. You have the accusers, you have the oppressors, those that are oppressing God's people. They are the ones who will get thrown into the pit. But Daniel and those following God faithfully, they won't be thrown into a pit. They're saved from that destruction, and they're given life, and life more abundantly, and more than anybody could have in this world, because they will have a new world, a new heaven, and a new earth. Okay, Daniel 6:25. Then King Darius wrote, "To all peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth." Wow, he's talking to everybody in the earth. And this is a pagan king who saw that there was something more than idols, a true and living God. He said, "Peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom, men must tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and steadfast forever. His kingdom is the one which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall endure to the end. He delivers and rescues, and he works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth, who has delivered Daniel from the power of the lions." So this Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. And this made me think, I don't know, it's just at the time I was thinking of 1 Corinthians 15:22, and it says this, and this is Paul writing to the Corinthians: "For as in Adam all die, even so in Christ all shall be made alive, but each one in his own order. Christ the firstfruits." And when you look at, I think it was James that said that we are a type of firstfruits, because they were being persecuted and killed following Christ, and he was also saying that they were a type of firstfruits, and we can see a firstfruits in Revelations also. And then afterwards, those who are Christ's at his coming. Then comes the end, when he delivers the kingdom to God the Father, when he puts an end to all rule and all authority and power, for he must reign till he has put all enemies under his feet. The last enemy that will be destroyed is death, for he has put all things under his feet. But when he says all things are put under him, it's evident that he who put all things under him is accepted. Now when all things are made subject to him, then the Son himself will also be subject to him who put all things under him, that God may be all in all. You know, we see Daniel seeing the salvation of God. We see a Babylonian king seeing that there is a salvation of God from a living God. We see the Persian king, these pagans that are saying that there is real salvation from a living God. And we have witness by the prophets, we have a witness by the apostles that walked with Christ, and we have witness of Christ himself who is speaking in the Bible. So I would encourage you to look at the Bible, begin to read it, study it, and walk with Christ, get to know him and his ways, and be faithful to the end, because God has given you life and life more abundantly. God bless you.